Welcome. Hi, so welcome to everyone joining the latest talk in the series of Deutsche Bank collection, Meet the Artist. I'm Mary Finley, International Curator for the Deutsche Bank collection, and we're so delighted to be here today to talk to artist Idris Khan about his work, live from his studio in London. And technology allowing, we're going to have a little tour at the end as well. So thank you, Idris, for
being
here.
It was a pleasure.
So before we start, just a few organisational points. I'll introduce Idris and we'll discuss his work for about half an hour, and then we'll answer a few questions from the chat box. So do put anything there, any questions you'd like to ask. And then technology allowing, we're going to finish with a quick tour of the studio, as I said, and as well as Zoom talks being streamed on Facebook and YouTube. So, and you will be able to watch later on as well. So here we are.
Yes.
So born in 1978 in Birmingham, Idris, you studied at the University of Derby and graduated from the Royal College of Art with distinction in 2004. And you were awarded an OBE by the British government for services to art in 2017. And your work is in many major collections around the world. Your first museum show actually was in Düsseldorf in 2007 at the K20 Museum. And excitingly, I understand you're going to have your first US survey exhibition in, is it Milwaukee Art Museum here and next year. So alongside quite a few other quite exciting projects. So we'll talk about those a bit near the end. Your work has been part of the Deutsche Bank collection though since 2006, and we've collaborated together on quite a few projects over the years. And most recently, the bank has acquired a major new work of yours, which we can see on screen, called The Four Seasons. And it hangs in our lobby, in the Deutsche Bank lobby in New York, which is our US headquarters, and does look absolutely amazing. And we will talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But first of all, just to bring a bit of context to your work, I wanted to talk about a couple of your early works. And these two works, Rembrandt by himself and Every, were first acquired with the first works basically that Deutsche Bank acquired by you just after you'd left the Royal College of Art. Now the image of Rembrandt consists of 60 self-portraits of him layered on top of each other, and so the image creates a synthesis of his entire life in a single image. Every is a homage to the famous photographers Bert and Hiller Becker, where you merged 120 of their images of a gas container into one. And so I wanted to ask, both works are great examples of your investigation into the passage of time. Could you explain your interest in this topic, as well as the process of layering that's, very important to your work, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, thank you for my life history. I appreciate that.
Nice to be reminded.
Always good, it's nice to be reminded. And I suppose, that was the work that I was making as I left the Royal College, was something that started when I was there, and that was probably because I was surrounded by a lot of photographers there. I studied photography, a lot of photographers there that were, I suppose, big on photographing the world, documenting the world in some way. I wanted more of a sort of studio practice to my work, and thinking about layering process of time, collapsing time into a single image. And we don't have an image up here now, but I suppose one of the first pictures I made was a piece called Every Photograph whilst traveling around Europe in the summer of 2002. So that was the first start, where I took all those photographs that one takes on summer holidays and sandwiched them into one in one photograph. And that was a process of rephotographing photographs, essentially. So picture on a copy stand, and kept going and going and going until this image became more painterly than actual photograph itself. And then that was to show a sort of passage of time collapsing into one moment. So you were looking at something in an instant that was full of time, if you like. And that went on to using books and photographing every page of a certain book. I photographed my father's Quran. I photographed on photography crises and Sontag. So just, I suppose, in that way that one reads, which is page by page, I just wanted to sort of collapse that, almost that experience into one thing. And then obviously with the two images that you see in front of you, moving into sort of looking at Rembrandt's self-portraits, which, I think it was about 65 in that. And then so you're left with looking at the journey of his painting of himself, obviously, and sketches in there as well. And you're sort of left with these ghostly eyes, almost like sort of like looking into, in a way, I suppose, somehow looking into time, if you like, and then traces of time. And then with the Becker picture next to it, you're sort of, I suppose I was most interested in the fact that they were photographing the same thing, but they were all slightly different. So then by collapsing them, you were more aware of the differences between the photographs rather than when you were looking at the single one. So it started to become more like a sort of, charcoal sketch or a drawing rather than a photograph. So that was the first investigation, understanding the surface of the photograph, how I can show my hand as a photographer rather than my eye, and almost leave the process of the camera behind, and then it becoming more like a drawing process. Like, yeah.
Well, actually, and it does, because it sort of energizes the work. It sort of becomes, well, it turns it into your work.
It's finding that sort of, it's finding what becomes yours in that process as well. And we can talk about the history of appropriation in art and artists that use that, things that already exist, so the found object as well. And most of these were taken from books that I have. So,
amazing. Okay.
These are those two.
Really interesting.
That's the start.
So your work, you developed your work beyond photography through the use of handmade stamps, which, as you can see here in the image, and you use them to sort of build up layers of words on the surface of paintings and wall drawings. That was also good examples behind us, but we'll see those in a moment. Including a wall drawing which we have at Deutsche in Birmingham called The River Runs Happy, which is one of my favourite works of yours. Absolutely fantastic. So what I wanted to ask you was the work, and a lot of these stamp works, I think, use philosophical statements layered over each other. Could you sort of talk to us about this development, I suppose, with the stamps, but also and using and the use of text, in your work?
I mean, it's a slight jump to these works, just because I think that, prior to like moving away from photography, I think the question that I was asking myself really was to do with surface quality. So the idea of changing a photograph into a drawing, or changing the idea of looking at a photograph at many cumulative moments, if you like, to then using stamps. There was a process where I was using a lot of sandblasting and steel and surface sculptures before I started wanting to have a painting process. So I was using templates, layering templates on top of each other, and then sandblasting through them and removing rusty surfaces and having this layering of musical notation first, actually. And then something kind of quite big happened in my life, where I went through a period of grief, and I was looking at ways of understanding that grief, and through writing was the way I did it. And then I had all these words and didn't really know what to do with them. Suddenly feel like I had to actually have a process of drawing or painting. So then I started making rubber stamps to almost I suppose rid oneself of grief in a very cathartic way. So a daily ritual, coming into the studio, stamping away what I was feeling, if you like, to get to another place, another higher ground, perhaps, of being. And so that's where those words started. And then, of course, I'm really into minimalism and abstract expressionism as well. And I love the work of Agnes Martin. And she was the inspiration. I mean, some of her words were the inspiration behind this particular work, because she was an artist who used text all the time. She liked to write lectures. She liked to write diaries. She kept, thoughts on what art was and the philosophy of art. So for this particular piece, I used her words to sort of make this work. And it was really great, because obviously I was raised in Birmingham, to go back and do a wall drawing there is nice. It's site specific, so it's on directly onto the wall. So there's a wall prep. It was curved. There's a certain different type of energy when you're doing something on the wall, because it's suddenly in a very expansive space rather than being contained space like you see behind you. It's something that can continue and continue and continue, and having this starburst shape allows that feeling of a viewer to fall into it, or to stand back and having a very expansive feeling as well. So I suppose it's lovely, because it's like this kind of repetition within painting that I love so much. The stamping is becoming almost like sound. And I think that's where I sort of also have that relationship with music as well.
Well, that brings us very nicely onto music.
Oh, great.
There you go.
There you go. Perfect.
So yeah, so music and musical scores have been a kind of a thread through your work. And it sort of feels to me like you're sort of reframing the way we look at music in a visual way. And I think the inspiration for this comes from your mother's love of music. Might be nice just to hear a bit about that, and also how you weave this juxtaposition between music and art into your work.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the time it's got to do with memory, because I think music triggers memories, as does photographs. So it can take you back to a place where you were or what you experienced. So it's all about this kind of bringing experiences back. This is a film that I made quite a while ago, in 2006. Again, thinking about how I could push. This was done on 16mm film at the time, which is obviously very difficult to use now. So it's kind of interesting to think back to it now, where I filmed a cellist playing Bach's cello suites, and I filmed her over and over again with the camera. So I rewind the film back on itself and re-record, rewind it and re-record. So you have this sort of layering experience as it's being filmed, and then you just see these sort of many moments, if you like, a cumulative film of many moments into one. Also the sound, it's a cacophony of sound. And that also came from layering a lot of musical notation. So I would photograph Bach's cello suites or Mozart's Requiem, where I photograph the actual scores themselves and layer them up on top of each other. So you're almost experiencing visually what you were hearing. And it was nice, actually. I've had a lot of people in the past, especially people who are difficult of hearing, say to me, well, that is actually something that I can visualize when I see that at work, which is really, really lovely. So yeah, it's kind of, I suppose, this sort of idea of cacophony, of sort of memory returning to a place that you were, and understanding that in a way. Of course, that's why I think I still use it in my collages as well. My new, the piece that in the Four Seasons as well is that that moment about that sort of memory of my mother being in her piano room and having musical sheets all over the floor and things like that. So it's kind of a nice memory to have. And we always have music sheets, you'll see when I walk around the studio, in the space where I watercolor the actual sheet itself. So no, it's kind of a nice thing to have always around.
Yeah, great. Well, that actually, there we go. So we're going to quickly talk about the Four Seasons work, actually. And actually, we've got a nice detail of it, which we'll move on to. So the work uses layered stamping of the notes, as you said, and from the sheet music of Vivaldi's violin concerto, the Four Seasons. Can you explain your inspiration for the piece and the process of making them? So I think it sort of marks up a new phase as well, even though you're still using the music. It's sort of you moved on, and particularly with colour as well.
Yeah. Actually, the two slides before that, you saw a quick glimpse of the ballet I made with Wayne McGregor and Max Richter. And Max Richter, I suppose that was kind of, for me, the first point of working with the Four Seasons music, because he recomposed Vivaldi's Four Seasons and did it in a way where he would be chopping up fragments of sound and making something that you are familiar with, because everybody knows, well, most people know Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and then making it a lot more modern in some way and bringing it back to the present day. So that was sort of the first engagement, and I built the sets for the ballet. And then to this piece, about a year ago, I did a show with Victoria Mirror Gallery in London, where I looked at the seasons passing, because I think over COVID we had a lot more time a lot more time to look a little bit more detail at things, and be more aware of our surroundings, perhaps, rather than the daily rush in life that we have. So I moved out to the English countryside, to Petworth in West Sussex, and I was surrounded by, suddenly in my first life, what I felt was the first time, colour and seasons changing and things, because it was around springtime and it was just popping up, and I thought, well, I've got to sort of build on this, and how can I do it? So these were a series of watercolours, mounted paper onto aluminium, so I like a lovely flat surface. And it was just like an investigation into colour, investigation into seasons, and then the idea of using the Four Seasons notation on top made complete sense as well, just to link it back to that. And then I suppose this was the first time using stamps, using musical stamps as well, and I suppose, changing the nature of music in a way that becomes a sort of painterly object rather than the sound itself and musical notation, because I suppose most of this, to us, music is abstract. So it's almost playing on the abstraction. And then you have this sort of collage element in the middle of it, which is, you know, the idea of changing its nature by turning it on its sides. You have these vertical lines through it, which I actually call rests, which I think is really quite a nice idea, that you're using rest form in music, but they become the bars, and then the line across the bottom as well, which is the pure colour. So yeah, there are many moments of rests in the cumulative colour.
And also, what's nice is that Central Park's just around the corner, and the seasons are just, you know,
It made perfect sense to do that work there, and actually, I suppose in my head a little bit, I was thinking about Mark Rothko's commission that he had for the Four Seasons restaurants in, when was that, probably 60s or something like that. That never happened, and then it was like, oh god, no, it's not far away, where that was, and it was a nice idea to do these 4 big paintings for the lobby. So you're almost bringing the seasons inside, which is constantly changing outside.
Yeah,
in the park.
No, that's fantastic. So we've sort of been through it, but you started your career as a photographer, progressed into painting, but actually more recently you've also done some really large scale sculpture works, including this work called Wahab Al Harama in Abu Dhabi, which means oasis of dignity.
Yes.
And it's such a beautiful and thought-provoking work, made as a memorial to lost soldiers, which at its highest point, I think, is 26 meters high, and must have been very complex to produce. So I was wondering if you could just maybe explain briefly how you approached this kind of challenge and the process from concept to production, because as you say, it's like, you know, suddenly you become an architect, really.
It was a huge moment, just in terms of its scale, but also in terms of its speed and producing it. I think I had to, well, we fully landscaped a 56,000 square meter park in around about 11 months, and the sculpture was the center point, as well as a sort of big pool of water, and then also I was invited to create a pavilion at the end of the experience of the sculpture. I never worked in that scale before, obviously, and so obviously the challenge is exciting. I think the only thing that the commissioner said to us was you can't go above 30 meters, and you should never say that to an artist, because you know you're obviously going to try to do that. So it's something I wanted to make as big as possible, but I think more so, you're right. Yes, it was a sculpture that was dedicated as a monument. But for me, I suppose the first question I asked myself was, can I make a sculpture about loss? Everyone has to go through it in their lives, and I wanted to make a sculpture that almost felt like it was an overwhelming experience, because I think that loss is. And you know, when you go into the sculpture, these aluminium structures are so high and so tall that you sort of get lost in shadow and light. So I think I was playing with shadow and light, feeling this overwhelming presence of this large structure to make you feel kind of small in some way. And then, you know, then obviously with the leaning idea was that it was actually to do with support at that time, that a country or you know, your loved ones around you were supporting you when you're going through such a difficult time. So that's why nothing ever felt like they were falling. And I feel like it's quite has quite a lot of rhythm, actually, that things are going forward but they're being pushed back. They're not good, and they're not quite falling, they're just leaning there, almost trying to be pushed forward. And that was such an interesting thing to do at that scale. Suddenly I'm working with like engineers and architects to understand that what can, or the possibilities of something cantilevering that much, and how it has to go into the ground. I mean, it was a huge project. And then right down to the building at the end, which you see the sort of that bottom right picture. You see the lights on the wall, which is the lights of the names of different soldiers who lost their lives, and also then the glass sculpture in the center, which is I thought it was quite ethereal, had a very ethereal quality to it, which is quite nice, that you sort of look through this sort of glass structure into the names of people.
Amazing. It's absolutely beautiful. I'd love to go and visit it.
Oh.
So just moving on to another topic, because you're very generous with your time for causes sort of dear to your heart, and I've personally witnessed this, because without you, we wouldn't have managed to launch the Fries and Deutsche Bank Emerging Curators Fellowship in 2020, which aims to address racial disparities in the visual arts sector. Your enthusiasm and the brilliant idea for a signed face mask to support the cause started the project, and we've now sold over 2,500 of them. And the project's gone on, we've developed it, and within the last 2 years, we've placed 3 emerging curators at UK institutions. So I think there's a big thank you from us and from Fries for that. And then obviously more recently, you made a print for Ukraine with the charity Migrate Art in aid of the Disasters Emergency Committee, which raised £200,000 in 10 days. So which is an amazing, fantastic achievement, really. I mean, it was a big push. So I think I just wanted to ask you what sort of drives you to be involved in these projects, because
No, I mean, I think, you were just saying before that I think it's a very impulsive thing to do, to try and do anything or something, at difficult times, with the mask, going through COVID, being, completely, I'm shocked, the whole world was shocked into that moment, and what can you possibly do? People, funding was bad in the arts, and things were getting cut all the time. So, with your great idea to help, to try and help fund that, and to try and create an artwork that people would respond to very quickly. And of course, everybody needs masks.
Yeah,
and the color was great because I was using that color at the time, and I think that that was a great push. I mean, with the Ukraine piece, coming. It was just one of those moments in listening to the news on the way back from dropping my kids off at school, and then it's like, God, what can we do? And it had to happen fast because people lose interest in some way, and so I got in touch with Simon straight away, and it was like, okay, I've got this piece that I just literally, it was like 2 pieces of paper on my studio table thing. Well, that makes sense because it kind of looks like the flag, and it's got music and rhythm, and I suppose the idea behind it was to do with the fact that so many people were leaving well, that's not good, is it? People pinging. Sorry, apologize. Coming in and then seeing these 2 pieces of paper together and thinking about the rhythm of people leaving and fleeing, and that sort of idea of movement was in my head, and got it done together really quickly. And of course, putting on a 10-day thing was great because I think people reacted fast. And I was overwhelmed really with the response. It was really great.
Really amazing. So my final question relates to what you've got coming up next, because you've got this big survey exhibition in Milwaukee. So I don't know, just maybe you could tell us a bit about that show and how it's put together, and what other upcoming projects you've got.
Yeah, I mean, so I've got a show opening at Château Lacoste in Provence with my wife Annie, who's also an amazing artist. So she has a new building that they just finished there, the Oscar Niemeyer Pavilion, which was a building that Oscar designed before he passed away, one of his last buildings. And I'm in the Richard Rogers building, which is, again, the last project he realized before he passed away. And that's kind of moving. So I've got a series of watercolors and some paintings. And then a show coming up at Sean Kelly, LA. My gallery in New York is opening. Gallery in Los Angeles in September. So I'll be the first show. So I've got a lot of work to do. Behind you, you see the unfinished paintings. Hopefully, no one from the gallery is watching. So that's going to be happening over the next month or so to finish all the work for that. And then, yes, end of next year, I'll be working on a big show in Milwaukee Art Museum, which is a survey exhibition of the last 20 years. 20 years of work. Which, I mean, you mentioned the K20 exhibition in 2007, which was my first museum show. Which was again a survey of 3 or 4 years, trying to bring together 20 years is going to be kind of an amazing thing to do, especially as an artist, when one reflects and looks back at what they've created over a 20-year period. It's kind of an interesting thing to do.
And you've got to try and get all the work back.
Oh my God.
You've sold the bunch.
Oh my God.
Okay, so we're going to look at the questions, if we've got any, and then we're going to we'll walk around the studio. So do I press on there? Oh. No.
We're going to walk.
They're in the Q&A. Here we go. Right. So we've got a question that says, we can read it.
Yeah.
It's quite small. Blue features heavily in much of your work. Why blue?
Okay. There was a moment where I feel like I was making far too many things in black and white. So I probably needed a bit of a jump to something else. And I think that blue as a color has a similar sort of mythical quality or a spiritual quality. And I think it also links to my upbringing. I was raised as a Muslim up until the age of 17, 18. I sort of stopped practicing. And one thing's blue, and I was actually very inspired by a particular page of the Quran that was at the Louvre Museum while I was working on the Abu Dhabi project. And that sort of thing, I've got, I don't know, so that there was a moment there, I was thinking, what color could I use? And it was really close, this unbelievable blue that I was seeing there. And of course, it's in a lot of mosques as well. Blue tiles are the famous blue mosque in Istanbul as well. So there was a link there to that, but I also think that it has a quality where one can get lost in this kind of that particular blue that I use. It's like it's not neither day or night, it's sort of in the middle of it, and yeah, it's sort of that kind of meditative quality that I want in a painting. And with the paintings, I use gesso, and gesso's got this kind of amazing mattness to it. That I paint like 15 layers of paint on top of each other and then sand it back until it's completely smooth surface. So then the oil almost feels like it's sitting inside the color rather than sitting on the surface. You also feel like almost embedded, and it's such an absorbent surface, so it sort of falls into it. But so yeah, I think it's one of those qualities that one of those colors that have that quality that you can sort of lose oneself in. So that's why I think black and white as well.
Yeah.
To be honest.
That's my favorite.
Good question.
Sorry, so I've got another one here that says you started off primarily working in photography, but have since moved into other mediums. Will photography always be the home to what you return to, or do you see that more as a development away from it? See this more as a development away from it?
I definitely think that it's still probably one of the places that I feel are most comfortable when I'm making a photograph, but digitally, if you like, and I really like the process of it and how far I can push that sort of digital medium, if you like, as well. So yeah, lots more photographs. I've got one big one that I'm working on for the Sean Kelly show. So that's kind of quite a large one. It's already taken me a couple of months to do, so it's still not finished. But I will, and it's I think it's I don't mind which mediums I use as long as the idea, or the realization of that idea comes across. I never really found myself being constricted to a medium, especially with photography early. Yes, I studied it. Yes, I understand it. Yes, I love the history of it, but it wasn't necessarily something that I really felt that I was suddenly going to go out and be a documentary photographer or was obsessed with the cameras or the process of it. It was something that was a tool very much to create with in an abstract way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good question.
Good question. Okay, so we're going to swap onto a phone, and then Idris is going to take us around the studio. So we tried this earlier. It worked very well, except for the audio. So Idris is going to walk you around, and if he ends up taking you elsewhere, I'll sort of let you know where he is. You'll be able to see it. So.
Do you remember what to do? Do we mute? I can't remember what one mutes.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay.
Does that work?
Hopefully everyone can hear us. So I don't know if you want to maybe give everyone a bit of a sort of show a few things.
Yeah.
Walk around a few. We're in North London.
We are. Is everything good? Can we see? I think everything is good. Yes, we are. So we're in North London. So the studios themselves, there's a row of these particular buildings that were they were old toy factories. So Monopoly was made on this street. Waddington's toy factories had the whole street, and they made these purpose-built buildings. Annie and I moved in here 2010, I think, and there was a wall that divided the space, and we were always pushing this wall one way and the other way to get more space. And so that was lean up there. So this is where I work. This is where most of the gesso paintings happen. These are the new ones for Sean Cage. And this is the first time that I've ever combined both music and words into painting. And I thought it would be quite nice to have this almost frame within a frame in the paintings. And then you sort of have the music in the center, and then on the outside, what will happen will have some English text that sort of meets this point here. But you can kind of get a sense of the detail. They're quite large. I think they're probably around 2 meters by meters 70. So there'll be hopefully 4 of those, and you can see as well. And then yeah, these are some things that I'll be making with I would say in a similar way to the painting, but they'll be the same. They'll be being 12 because sort of portfolio work, and these are just the same to start with. What happened here is that the oil the oil gets stamped onto the surface, and then these get scanned into the computer, and then we work on the colours and screen prints. So there is 12 screen prints. What else is going on? I mentioned all the sheet music that's always in the studios. This is a lot of this. So it's always sort of various colours of different sheets of music. Because I'm working on, for example, this is a maquette of the sculpture that I made in London called 65,000 Photographs, where I stacked 65,000 photographs on top of each other and cast it in aluminium. So that's a permanent sculpture down in Blackfriars. Yeah. Some other prints, music issues, paintbrushes. Then this sculpture that I made out of the stamps that I use. So this is a plaster cast, very complicated plaster cast actually, of the stamps. And if I go here, you can see them. It still works.
Right.
And maybe now, Mary, you can.
I'll take over. So Idris is just, because you won't be able to hear him, you'll be able to hear me. It's just going into his office where you can see these are all the stamps that he uses to make the paintings. And he has them in blocks. And actually, we did an installation of these a couple of years ago, last year, sorry, actually, at Freeze. But they're rather amazing artworks in their own right. Beautiful photograph. And then are you going to walk? I think you might just take us down to Annie's studio, just very quickly. So yeah, sorry, the audio on the phone isn't working, but this is his wife's Annie Morris's studio, which is next door, and she's preparing for a show. These rather amazing sculptures that she makes, as well as I'm not sure what else is in the studio at the moment, but as well as tapestries and oh, it's coming back. Oh, there we go. There are the tapestries. Right, so there we go. Tour of the studio.
Bit more in other spaces too, more of a messy space down at the end, but nobody wants to see it.
Brilliant. Okay, we'll turn off that. So Idris, I think that's all that's left to say is thank you so much for your time. It's been great. And if everyone's enjoyed it, the film's going to be sitting on YouTube, so you can share it with people. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Apart from a bit of pinging and a dog outside.
Oh, is it all right? Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Bye. I'm leaving.